Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Huw Fullerton, and normally this would be the point where Morgan Jeffrey would be introducing himself. Alas, Morgan's not here, but the moment has been prepared for. Morgan, as he warned last week, has regenerated into the form of a previous Doctor Who podcast guest, Helen Daly. Hello, Helen.
Hello, I'm now a woman. It seems quite timely.
That's true. Brilliant. So thanks so much for coming on. It's your first time since we started recording these over the Subwave network. And in a very kind of appropriate topic for what we've just talked about. This week, we're following up. Last week, we were chatting all about regeneration episodes, aka the episode where we say goodbye to a doctor. And I was kind of interested, the other side of the coin on that is, what's the episode after that? That's always the episode where we meet a new doctor. And I actually kind of feel like that is as much a difficult thing to nail as the exit episode. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I'd say it's arguably harder because, you're setting up a brand new era of Doctor Who, and it's hard not to fall into that trap. I was having to think about what a kind of new Doctor Who episode is. And, you always have I've got a new face. I don't like the colour of my kidneys and stuff like that. And I think you have to kind of get that out of the way in order to kind of bridge the gap between two doctors, and then you can move on with the new doctor. But yeah, I think it's quite hard to do because you're establishing the full era there, and it's quite weighty and it's quite daunting in a way to do that. And I think, not everyone does it perfectly. I think, some have been better than others, but I'm sure we'll get onto that. But I think, it's an important episode, definitely, in a series.
I think you're right in that it's a real tightrope to walk, because I feel like quite often when you watch these episodes, it feels quite self-consciously, everyone's watching being like, who's this new guy or girl? Who's this, person who's stepped into the role? What are they going to be like? And it is very much a kind of like, ooh, look at me, I'm different. Here's my little dance. Like, for example, I feel like with the modern ones, every one seems to be kind of a reaction to the other, in that, Christopher Eccleston's a little different because we kind of don't have that regeneration. He was introducing back to the whole show. But then David Tennant basically spends his introduction episode unconscious for about 50% of it. Then, like, the flip of that, Matt Smith is like constantly busy, rushing around. He doesn't have a moment to breathe in his one. And then in Pete Capaldi's one, he's like quite unpleasant and mean in his first one. And then the flip of that is Jodie Whittaker is like incredibly like upbeat and kind of like, yay, go team, positive. And I feel like the show is always in conversation with itself, right? It's always about kind of reinventing itself. And I feel like, especially in the modern era, that is very much with these first Doctor episodes, or these first episodes of a new Doctor, you kind of need to put a new stamp on it, but while also reassuring it's the same show. I mean, if you go back to the classic series, obviously the prime example of this is Patrick Troughton when he took over from William Hartnell, back when regeneration wasn't even a word in the show's vocabulary. It was a renewal, I think, or I'm not sure if they even say that. Yeah, they said renewal, and the idea was that he was a younger version of William Hartnell's Doctor, at least behind the scenes. But even then, you kind of do have this very different figure who appears and is introduced, and it's all about how the companions react to him. And last week, you may not know this, but last week Morgan and I were chatting about how the sort of Doctor exit episodes weren't always a thing in the classic series. It's kind of more of a modern creation. But I do feel like the new Doctor episodes always have been, because it's the great risk of Doctor Who, isn't it? It's like the show's only as good as its next Doctor and its last Doctor. It's kind of like it's like you've got a great sort of really expensive car, right? And you're handing the keys over to the next driver, and you're kind of like, I hope we don't crash it.
Yeah, like how many tests did they take before they passed and stuff like that. But
yeah,
I think you're right. Like, it's such a delicate line to tread, and they have to be different from one another. You can't have someone come on and have the same opening or the same kind of mantra of being a doctor. They have to be different, but at the same time, how many differences can you have? You're always going to have like little bit of like repetition. I spotted, John Pertwee's opening episode featured autons, which obviously we saw with Christopher Eccleston's opening episode. And obviously, it's probably done tongue in cheek, but there's going to become a point in Doctor Who future where, they're going to do like a very similar opening, and you're going to be like, well, that's just like Matt Smith's opening or something.
Yeah.
And I think it's tricky. I think, it's so important, but then how do you do it without it becoming a cliche almost? Because, you know, you always have the same opening almost every time. It's the, I have a new face, I'm a new person. It's almost a, you know, this is Doctor Who, this is the series, welcome. But then you need to, what I've personally hoped for in the future is that they just kind of get past it. It's like, yeah, okay, I've snapped into a new Doctor, let's go on an adventure. And I feel like that happened a little bit more in the classic era. And I'd like to see it brought forward a little bit. You know, we've had, what, 4 new Doctors in the new series, and I think we can start to just accept that regeneration happens. It is big, yes, it's a new person taking over, but we don't need the whole, like, oh, new eyes, new hair, new teeth, this feels weird. We know it's weird. That's Doctor Who. We're over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I think sometimes it can come off a bit mannered as well. The whole like, oh, my kidneys, I don't like the color kind of thing. Like you kind of like that bit's kind of been done. Equally though, I guess you've got to think, you know, there's always someone new coming to the show. Someone always needs to know that why this artist is big on the outside. You know, it's constantly kind of trying to work itself for those people. But it's again, it's a different tightrope. There's many tightropes. Doctor Who jumps between tightropes. But you know, you kind of the eternal Doctor Who thing is satisfying those long-term fans who, you know, are kind of what make the show what it is, with also, you know, the new fans who at some point will become the long running fans, you hope. Like there are people who were new fans in 2005 who are now in their own way long running fans, you know. No, I think it's a real tricky thing. Personally, I don't mind those episodes. Like I think the 11th hour is actually great. I think that's a really, really good one, partly because it doesn't give you a second, and they kind of do a clever thing there with he's a new Doctor to us, but he's immediately an old Doctor to Amy or Amelia, in that like they kind of give him this history within 10 minutes. Like he's only been alive for 10 minutes, but he's already been affecting lives for a decade. You know, I thought that was a very clever way of kind of immediately making him significant because he's significant to somebody, if that makes sense. Whereas, yeah, sometimes you're a bit like, you kind of feel like, oh, we'll get past this episode and then see what the Doctor's actually like, if you know what I mean. In the series, like kind of let it run out. And sometimes, you know, it takes a while. Like Peter Capaldi's opening episode, Deep Breath, I don't think that's like the best version of that Doctor that exists. I feel like we kind of only really get to know his Doctor in his second and third series, to be honest. And I feel like that intro episode doesn't quite work for him.
But you really have to have that intro episode because it has to be completely different to jovial Matt Smith. You have to have slightly grumpy Peter Capaldi, and it works, like, because you eventually, you know, warm to him, and that's the point of it.
Yeah.
But you know, just harking back, like even just the modern Doctors, David Tennant kind of had like 2 opening episodes, right? Like he had Christmas Invasion, then New Earth, which was also a kind of like brand new episode for him. And you know, it was, you know, probably too much in the end. Like I can't personally enjoy a Christmas Invasion now just because of the hamminess of it, I dare say. But you know, something like the 11th hour, it's smart, it's quite slick, it's actually a really good story as well. And I think it didn't just set up the Doctor, it set up the Ponds, it set up the whole crack in time and space. Like it set up a lot more than other kind of opening episodes have done. And I think that for me is what makes a really good and really great debut for a Doctor almost.
Do you know the story about the 11th hour was originally going to possibly be a David Tennant episode?
Yeah.
Yeah, where he was sort. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before. But David Tennant said he might stay when Stephen Moffat took over, so he basically wrote an episode where the 10th Doctor arrives, regenerating, about to die, and Amy meets him, and then, or whoever it is, and then, you know, he comes back still alive, essentially, and you're kind of like, oh, how did he get to this point? And then that stuff does actually make its way into the series, because you know, have the thing of Matt Smith being shot and regenerating, and then you kind of like, oh, the younger version turns up, and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, no ideas are ever wasted, especially when Stephen Moffat's involved. But you do kind of think that would have been quite an interesting way. And it's interesting to think, I think part of the reason that episode works so well is because it's a story that doesn't have to be an opening episode, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah, no, that's exactly it. It doesn't have to be an opening episode. It works as a standalone. Any Doctor realistically could have done that episode. And I think that's what makes it so strong, because it flows a lot better than the others. The others do stand out for that reason of being opening episodes. But if you look back into the classic Who era, you know, all of the opening episodes were pretty much 4-parters. And I think, you know, they're all part of something greater, which is what the 11th hour is. And I do want to see more of that going forward.
Yeah, I'm quite interested. I was saying to Morgan the other day, my sort of idea, which I came up with on the spot, so it's not very well realised, is that you have a kind of It's a little bit, I've since realised that it is exactly the same, more or less, as the next Doctor, but actually following through with that. The idea being that, like, say Jodie's, she's not leaving, but say she was leaving, in her final episode or final couple of episodes, she teams up with the next version of herself. And so her last episode is the same episode as that Doctor's first episode. And you kind of have a direct passing of the torch in a way, which I think could be quite fun. But then it kind of detracts from both, is the flip side.
Get on the phone now and pitch it. I think it sounds cool. And it's different. Exactly. You're sitting there thinking of different ideas. And I think that's like probably the most important thing, I
guess that possibly that one's different though, because people have thought of that and thought, no, that's rubbish, that doesn't work.
You never know until you try. But no, but I think there's something in that, and I think there's something in the demand for something a little bit different. When Joe Martin popped up on screen and was revealed to be a future Doctor, we were like, what? Okay, when can we see more? And the demand's there for it, and I think it was a really interesting thing to do. And I think I would want to see more of Joe Martin. I'd want to see more difference. I'd want to see the Doctor is the best when he or she is thrown into an unusual situation. We don't want to see the episodes that we've seen before, the standard historical episode or the standard futuristic spaceship episode. We want to see something a little bit different, and I think that should stand for the opening episode as well. Like, you don't have to have the opening scene just being the Doctor rediscovering their face. They could just go straight into the action
and do a big speech at the end where they say, like, I know what kind of person I am now at the end of this hour-long adventure. I've worked it out. I'm this sort of person.
Hello, Christmas Invasion. I think that, it is good. It's important. It sets up the era. But at the same time, we've had that now. And I think it would be really daring to just ignore that completely and just move on with the adventures.
It's tricky, isn't it? It's hard to know what would work. Because I think the thing is, it's like, I remember when David Tennant left, I remember there was this interview with Matt Smith where the interviewer said to Matt Smith, like, my son started crying when David Tennant turned into you, like the moment his face changed to yours. I mean, what do you have to say to that? And I was like, well, that's horrible. And like Matt Smith's face like fell, and he was like, oh God. And I feel like there is that kind of thing where like you kind of really do want people to like this new Doctor. And, I guess that's the risk, isn't it? You kind of want them to have this big hero moment. So you kind of are like, okay, I believe this person. I'm snapped in. I mean, I was thinking about that David Tennant episode, Christmas Invasion, which is the first Christmas special as well. So it packs quite a lot in. The funny thing about that one is, obviously, he's not around for a lot of it. And I think part of that is that it's quite clever in that you kind of have him a little bit in it, but you kind of follow characters you do know, like Rose and Jackie and Mickey and Harriet Jones. And then you kind of have the Doctor in the background. And then by the time he actually comes, it's to save everyone. You're kind of like, thank God he's here. Do you know what I mean? Like, it sort of does that work for you, and the Doctor's there. Like, and if he was right in there solving stuff, you'd be like, oh, you're not Christopher Eccleston, what are you doing? But then you put Rose in that situation, and then once Rose accepts him, that kind of, we kind of accept him as well. And then obviously they leaned into that with Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi, in that canonically, Clara was quite unhappy that the Doctor turned into an older actor who was kind of rude, which was, an issue some fans had as well, at least at the start. And I think that was kind of quite clever. They probably anticipated some of the criticisms they'd get. But equally, it does something for the story where, like, it is a big thing. I don't think we have enough episodes, at least in the modern era, of companions kind of weathering that change. Obviously, you have Clara and you have Rose, but Peter Capaldi regenerates on his own. David Tennant regenerates on his own. I kind of feel like having someone bridge that gap is sometimes quite an important part of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I was just thinking back then, actually, I wonder if there's some kind of decision making with what the opening episode is like and how that compares to the kind of actor that's coming in. So obviously, David Tennant steps into the role, very well known, very established. Everyone was like pretty chuffed about it. So he gets, the kind of, like you say, a more nuanced opening where he's not there, then all of a sudden he is, oh, he's the Doctor now. Whereas Matt Smith, had to kind of prove himself a little bit. He wasn't everyone's first choice immediately. Yeah. And I feel like the 11th hour was him showing, actually, I am a Doctor. Like, this is why I'm going to go through the full adventure. I'm going to do the full rigmarole. I am the Doctor now. Oh, look, here's my TARDIS, proving it all. This is me. And then you go to Peter Capaldi. Again, very well known, jump straight into the adventure. Fine. he's obviously a little bit grumpy, it's a bit different, but he's still the Doctor in an adventure, just like David Tennant. And
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
with Jodie Whittaker, you get a similar situation where, she had a lot to prove. She did, thankfully, but yeah, she had to go through the whole action. I mean, did anyone run further, climb higher than Jodie Whittaker in her first episode? Probably not. Like, she had a lot to prove, and she did live up to it. So I think maybe that is the thing. If the next person is relatively unknown, will they again have to prove themselves as the Doctor, or vice versa? If they are known, will they just have to arrive and be the Doctor?
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the thing with Matt Smith's episode is he's already put through the ringer. Like, I remember at the time they kind of promoted it as like, oh, when David Tennant's Doctor regenerated, it was so traumatic he had to sleep the whole time. Matt Smith's Doctor can't sleep because he's got too much to do. Like, he would need to, but he can't. Like, he's just got to, everything breaks. He hasn't got a TARDIS. He hasn't got a sonic screwdriver. It explodes in his hand. He solves it one way, and then that doesn't work. So he has to solve it another way. And it's kind of like he's constantly reacting, but then you sort of feel his struggle and you kind of root for him because of that. And then by the end, you're like, yeah, I buy this. It's a really confident episode. Like I said, I think it is probably the best Doctor intro. Like, it made me so excited for that whole season. I mean, there's that great trailer that they released for that season right after that episode aired as well, where they kind of do the like what's coming up ahead thing. And that trailer is so good. Actually, we watched it recently because we covered the 11th hour on this very podcast quite a while ago now, and I rewatched the whole episode. Plus, the trailer's still stuck on the end for that, and I was like, oh man, this was just so good. It's just so confident and so like fun. And yeah, I think
music as well.
Oh, the music's so good.
Yeah, we're both singing it like the same time.
Yeah. You don't come here for the music, I know, listeners, but you're getting some anyway. I think it's always a difficult one to broach. Like, I mean, The Woman Who Fell to Earth was obviously the most recent Doctor intro, and I remember I watched that in Sheffield actually, so it was very sort of in media res, as it were, and I really enjoyed that. I watched it in the cinema. But I remember like the BBC were quite worried about it being too dark, like literally physically too dark, and they were kind of like worried about the reaction Jodie was going to get. And I think the episode got a really strong reaction. I think now when I look back at it, I'm like, maybe I was quite like caught up in it. And, I don't think it maybe stands the test of time quite as well as something like the 11th hour. But, it's pretty better than Deep Breath. So it's all a spectrum, isn't it?
In terms of the story, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, it's, it's there, it happens.
Yeah.
But, in terms of showing what Jodie's Doctor can do, it's slap bang on the money. She runs, she talks fast, she does the whole like Doctor stuff that you expect, all the cliches. But, you kind of need that, and it sets her up as being a little bit quirky, a little bit different, but still, she's tied to Sheffield, and that's quite nice and quite different. It's a little bit Christopher Eccleston, all planets have a north situation. Exactly. So I think, I think story-wise it's not great, but in that instance, because of the circumstances with her being the first female Doctor, I think it had to be a little bit different. I think she had to prove that she had the skills to play the role, and I think she did that absolutely fantastically.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to like her sort of end bit and her amazing little theme that plays at the end when she's on the crane. I think that's just such a great moment. And yeah, no, I think you're definitely right. I think it's always a tricky thing to do, and it's very easy for us to obviously sit here and say, oh yeah, they should have done this, they should have done that. Quite a lot of the time, I'm sure they thought about doing this or that, and that didn't work for another reason. And everything about that episode, obviously, is that it's also introducing like 3 companions. The 11th hour manages to introduce Amy as well, and Rory to an extent, but this introduces a whole other person and has them all go off traveling with the Doctor pretty much within the same episode. So yeah, it has a lot to do, that one. I mean, I'm interested. I should feel like I might rewatch it at some point. It's been ages since I've seen it. Maybe as we get more into autumn, because it's quite an autumny episode for me. Because it came out in October and it was all sort of dark and like everyone's dressed quite warmly, which I like. I feel like I will definitely try and revisit that one. But yeah, I think, as we say, the opening episode for a Doctor is like a very challenging one to meet. I mean, we've covered a couple. Looking back, we've actually covered a couple of them on this podcast. We've done the 11th hour, we've done Rose. I don't think we've done the Christmas Invasion, so watch out for that. And I think we sort of covered Woman Who Fell to Earth, but in a slightly different way before this was called the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast, because it's fairly recent, so it hasn't quite made it on here yet. But yeah, no, I think it's difficult. I mean, I've sort of said 11th hour is my favorite, and you've sort of said maybe similar. I mean, of the ones that you're most familiar with, which, I don't want to be negative, which one do you think doesn't quite nail it as well?
I mean, if I have to rank them, I think the Christmas Invasion for me is at the bottom, and
Really?
it's only because I don't think it's aged well, and that's
I'd
not
have to
from like.
disagree on that. I'd have to disagree on that.
Fair enough. No, that's fair enough. You know, I was thinking, I mean, if it depends what kind of parameters we're going to put on this debate, it's going to get quite deep quite quickly. So, you know, I was thinking about Rose. We haven't really touched upon Rose too much. Is that really Krista Eccleston's like Doctor debut, or is it Billie Piper's Doctor Who debut?
It's a good question.
It's
She is the main
more
character of that episode. Like, it's named after her. Like, she was kind of the main character in that series, really. So yeah, it's a tricky one, that one, because it kind of, he does have those like, oh, my ears look a bit funny kind of moment, and we do meet him, but yeah, it's not quite. He's kind of the status quo already, even though we've only just met him.
Yeah, but then, you know, so if we're talking about, you know, which episode introduces the Doctor perfectly, maybe not Rose for me, but that is one of my favorite episodes, so I can't.
It kind of introduces him pretty well. It's just different, isn't it? It's like it's introducing the Doctor, not this version of the Doctor. Like, it's kind of doing something, and it's introducing the show as well, and Rose. So I guess it's kind of doing something a bit different.
I'm going to put that on a completely higher tier, maybe God tier, if we're going to do that. Yeah, so I think, 11th Hour for me is probably my favourite. I would say Christmas Invasion is my least favourite, despite the fact that David Tennant is one of my favourite Doctors. I don't think, for me, it's as kind of clever and as subtle as something like the 11th Hour. The one that fell to earth, I do really enjoy it. Just for me, seeing a northern woman taking on the mantle, I can't not enjoy it. And I think Deep Breath, I don't know, I found it fun, and I like the kind of diving straight into the action element of it. So I don't know, maybe I'm biased because I prefer, you know, Clara, possibly. She might be my favorite companion, so I can't put her at the bottom. There's a lot of layers to this, Huw. Like, this is what I'm saying.
There's a lot. I mean, we don't need a tier. We need a kind of weird sort of scatter diagram of all these different factors. I think
I'm gonna settle with a Christmas Invasion at the bottom.
It's controversial, and I'm pleased you picked that, because I really disagree. Because it gives me something to rage about. No, it's fine. I kind of get what you mean. Like, I remember even at the time, some guys I knew were sort of like moaning about the dialogue in that one. And you know, there's some bits where you're a bit like, oh, really? But it's just, I just think it introduces David Tennant. Considering Christopher Eccleston had reintroduced the role and only just been doing it for a series, I think it introduces David Tennant and has you accept him so quickly. And it's also probably, I mean, Doctor Who Christmas specials are a pretty mixed bag. Generally speaking, they're not very good. I once got in some trouble with Doctor Who fans, believe it or not, for suggesting that the Doctor Who Christmas specials are always bad. So who needs them? And this that people did disagree with me, very very nicely, as Doctor Who fans always do on the internet. No, most of them were very nice. But yeah, no, I think Christmas Invasion is probably, I do quite like Last Christmas, but I do think Christmas Invasions is probably the best Christmas special as well. And I think the fact it manages to be the first Doctor Who Christmas special, unless you count Feast of Stephen, and probably the best one, and is a new Doctor episode for the most popular Doctor, probably of our times. You know, not all time, because you've got Tom Baker in there, but you know, I feel like it does pretty well. I'd still say 11th Hour is my favourite, though. I'd put Christmas Invasion at number 2. I think 11th Hour I kind of think is a better product. I just think Christmas Invasion just does what it does very well. And then Deep Breath is probably my least favourite. I just feel like it's just sort of weird and grim.
Like, about me, I like the weird and grim.
Yeah, I just thought it was a bit dour. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I haven't rewatched it since 2014, so maybe it's time to give it a reappraisal.
I think it's aged better than a Christmas Invasion. I think if I'm thinking honestly, I would say that New Earth is a better introduction to David Tennant's Doctor than the Christmas Invasion. I think that is a better story. It's a little bit cleverer. You see a lot more of David Tennant's Doctor, and I think for me, that's a better introduction for him.
Well, it's interesting that you have that incorrect opinion, but you know, that's fine. No, joking. We're all friends here, or wherever we are at this particular time. But anyway, you've heard what we think. But what do you think, listeners? What's your favourite opening episode for a Doctor? Could be from the classic series. We haven't touched on that too much. There's loads of great episodes there. Could be one of the ones we've talked about in the modern series. And you know, what do you think makes it a good episode? What kind of are the elements you need to kind of introduce a Doctor, and what would you like to see change? What for the next Doctor, say, when he or she appears, what do you think should be in the opening episode? You can read more of our Doctor Who content, as ever, on radiotimes.com. We've got the latest updates on Time Lord Victorious, if you're into that, and lots of other Doctor Who news stories and things. Until next time, I've been Huw Fullerton.
I've been Helen Daly.
And this has been me saying goodbye to you. Goodbye.